Hello, hello, and welcome to the Summer Sustainability Summit brought to you by One Click LCA. My name is Mohammed Ali, and I'm happy to be your host today. The summit is a 2-day free event for architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, and sustainability professionals across the construction value chain. We are delighted to have you here to get inspired, get engaged, and get sustainable. Now let's start this session. I'm very excited to be joined by Ivonso, Executive Director at Singapore Green Building Council, Sam Archer, Director of Market Transformation at New Zealand Green Building Council, Tushant Suri, Board Member and Secretary at Emirates Green Building Council, George Chapa, Chief Impact Officer at Green Building Council of Australia, and we also have Satanathan Karthikeyan, Deputy Executive Director, CII at Indian Green Building Council. And from One Click LCA, we are joined by Natasha Das, who is a carbon and sustainability specialist. Welcome all to today's session. Today, we are going to discuss the pivotal role of green building councils in shaping the environmental policy and driving sustainable change. This session will offer valuable insights for construction professionals, policymakers, environmental activists, and anyone interested in sustainable construction. We will also have a live Q&A session at the end of this stream. So please feel free to drop in your questions in the chat now, and we will get back to them at the end of the discussion. The Summer Sustainability Summit is brought to you by One Click LCA, which is the global LCA software empowering the industry to decarbonize and get sustainable. With it, you can comply with more than 80 national standards, and you can access world's largest construction LCA database and bring LCA into your existing workflow with more than 20 BIM and other integration. For over 20 years, One Click LCA has been making the construction value chain sustainable. If you'd like to learn more about One Click LCA, you can visit us at oneclicklca.com. Now let's start our main discussion for the day. And for the first question, which I would like to ask from the speakers is, what is the role of local green building councils in advancing net zero 2050 agenda set forth by World GBC? Sam, would you like to answer that first?
Cool, certainly. So I mean, in my view, the biggest role that we can play as green building councils is to localize the different requirements that World Green Building Council have set forth. So each country has its own peculiar characteristics. For example, in New Zealand, where I am, typically over 80%, 90% of our electricity is renewable, and for that reason, we've chosen not to place a huge emphasis on supplying renewable energy from the building. For me, the biggest thing that we can be doing is interpreting the requirements set forth by the World Green Building Council and then interpreting them for our own countries.
Great, thank you for answering this, Sam. Yvonne, would you like to answer next?
Yes, sure. Very good day to everyone. So I think the World Green Building Council's global program is known as Advancing Net Zero, and that calls for the total decarbonization of the building and construction sector by 2050. The focus is very much on reduction first, before embarking on the various strategies to get emissions down to zero. But 2050 is a little far away, so there are also targets in the midterm by 2030. And for that 2030 target, we are working together to reduce carbon emissions on two fronts, and that is operational carbon as well as embodied carbon. For operational carbon, that is about optimizing and reducing energy demand to the greatest extent possible. And for embodied carbon, the aim is to reduce it by at least 40% by 2030, paying particular attention to upfront carbon, which that's generally, the carbon emissions associated with building materials as well as the construction processes. So for Singapore, we have the super low energy buildings program, which is essentially what we denote as the best in class energy performance level. And currently, that means achieving at least 60% energy savings above the 2005 building code levels, where 2005 is also the baseline year that we use for Singapore's NDC. And for embodied carbon, Singapore Green Building Council, together with our public sector partners, have also developed tools such as an embodied carbon calculator that comes with localized emission factors of key construction materials, as well as an industry guide on the minimum scope of materials to be included in accounting for and reporting of the embodied carbon of projects. So the key objective of these efforts is to have a harmonized approach that the whole industry in Singapore can move forward together with, and to also facilitate data analysis for future benchmarking. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for answering, Yvonne. George, would you like to go next?
Absolutely, and it's hard to follow such amazing individuals, and the all of our panelists here. So just before I start, just really wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. It's a way we like to traditionally or do this in Australia. Effectively recognize those who were here well before us, and well before me. In this case, I'm in the city of Melbourne, which is Bunurong Bun, Wurrung, and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay their respects, my respects to their elders, past, present, and of course to any other First Nations that may be represented on the call today. I think in terms of the question of what is the local green building council in the Advancing Net Zero 2050 agenda set forth by World GBC, one key thing is the key thing is we make it real. One benefit that World Green Building Council and the network of green building councils under it have on the compared to say other organizations is the movement of green building councils is grassroots led, right? Like we are here, we're on the ground, we're on all of these countries actually trying to make this a reality. So the World Green Building Council agenda is essentially the shared expression of everything all of us believe in. Yvonne, I think we'll remember all of us being in New York trying to put this together. I don't know, I want to say 7 years ago or something like that. Like it's been a while, and we're all trying to sort of say net zero by 2050 is an important target, right? It was just after the signing of the Paris Agreement, would have been a few short years after that, and we're trying to understand what is the role that buildings have and how we could express it internationally to say you need to pay attention to the building sector. It is a significant portion of global emissions. They occur because of the demand that we have in the building sector to provide quality, resilient, healthy spaces, right? We want places that are good for you, and that unfortunately requires energy, which in turn results in emissions. So that's what we do. We make it real. We take that expression, that vision, that principles, and we have to turn them into, say, rating tools, or we have to turn them into policies, or we have to turn them into programs for our members and the rest of the built environment to adopt. I would say key to us. So I'm from the Green Building Council of Australia. We do a lot of things where we take that vision aspect and those targets, and we work a lot with local governments. We work with the federal government, and we very much, in some cases, write the policies that we hope get adopted, so that then they can be used by the rest of the building sector. An example of that is some of the work we've done on homes, where we have a rating system for homes, for example. And what the reason we built it, that scheme, wasn't so much because we wanted to try and rate leading homes. We actually wanted to change the building code, and that's an example of how you take this big agenda, right? This 2050 agenda that we all set forward, and that was kind of adopted globally, and just brought down to like a clear expression of like how to deliver it, and that's the role we play.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. Tushant, can you answer the next, please?
Yeah, very good morning. I think, first of all, really glad to join such an esteemed panel. Um, I think from a local green building council, councils have three key roles to play. The first is localizing alignment with World Green Building Council's advancing to net zero commitment and pathway. The second, I think, is leveraging the membership and uh, partners together to enable the private sector to be on the journey. And thirdly, is advising the governments on what's really required from a climate transition point of view to successfully align with the 1.5-degree climate science.
Great. Thank you for answering, Tushant. Kartikeyan, would you like to add some comments to this?
Yeah, thank you. From Indian Green Building Council point of view, we believe in practicing first before start preaching our members. So we made our own building, the Green Business Center at Hyderabad, where I am sitting now, as a first net zero building in the country. Having done this, then it becomes easier for us to reach out to the members. So, my fellow panelists, all of you agree that the net zero concept need to be localized to the country. We also agree to that this has to be localized from the India point of view. So, what we have done is we launched a net zero mission. More than about 350 organizations, they have committed that they will make their buildings and built environment a net zero. And the second aspect is, net zero carbon is all said and done a long-term goal. So we have broken that into a kind of small steps called net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste to landfill, and then to net zero carbon. So what it does is it makes the end users to realize the benefits, get encouraged, and then go to the next steps. So all these, contribute to the net zero carbon approach. This is a very unique approach followed in India. The third aspect, what I would like to highlight here is, we don't believe in simply certifying the building. We have to create an ecosystem for the net zero to prosper. When I talk about ecosystem, we need to work on the capacity building. We need to bring in the technologies and services which can contribute to the buildings and built environment to become net zero. We have to work on the policies as well as the financing. So in all these aspects, Indian Green Building Council has taken initiatives in terms of facilitating the ecosystem to prosper. So these are some of the points taken by the Indian Green Building Council.
Thank you so much for answering, Kartikeyan. So moving on to our next question, which I would like to ask all of you is, can you let us know what are the policy and advocacy strategies of green building councils to drive and propagate decarbonization in the built environment? Yvonne, would you like to answer that first?
Yes, happy to. For us in Singapore, these strategies would be very much aligned with the Singapore Green Building Master Plan, which is a national action plan that was co-created by the Singapore Green Building Council together with the Building and Construction Authority, and we launched this in 2021. So the Green Building Master Plan sets out Singapore's environmental sustainability ambitions for the built environment, and is also part of the broader Singapore Green Plan 2030, which is a collective whole of nation, whole of country effort to support Singapore's Paris commitments, our NDC, and our national plans to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So what is in the Singapore Green Building Master Plan? Okay, it's also called the 80-80-80 plan because it has three targets based on 80%. And these three targets are, firstly, to green 80% of our buildings by 2030, and this is measured by gross floor area. Second is to have 80% of our new developments to be super low energy buildings from 2030. And thirdly, to achieve an 80% improvement in energy efficiency for our best-in-class green buildings by 2030. Yeah, so that's our 80-80-80 strategy. Thanks.
Thank you so much for answering. Tushant, can you add on that, please?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful tools for us here at Emirates GBC in the UAE has been the establishment of Net Zero Center of Excellence. This was established in 2018 with a focus on three key areas. The first is providing a platform for government, academia, industry, and the private sector to come together and share knowledge and best practice on net zero. The second is supporting the future building regulations, so working very closely with local and federal authorities on the transition and development and evolution of the building code that enables all new developments to align with the 1.5-degree climate science. And lastly, it's offering tools and resources and acting as a think tank to support and enable a positive impact of the built environment in the region.
Great. Thank you so much. George, would you like to add on something?
Testing. There we go. Very happy. I think the key to us is very much working with government on long-term planning and thinking. Um, we spend a lot of time trying to get government to just maybe remember that doing policy by surprise is never a good action. So we try and set long-term targets and long-term sort of policy positions with them so that people aren't surprised by what we want to do. And we do that through a few mixes of sort of solutions, right? We create the roadmaps that then get adopted by several layers in government. We introduce some of those elements into a rating system that we have, which is voluntary, but then we create that industry practice that we can then use to have government adopt and see that it is possible to do the things we ask for. And then we also try and get those things announced well in advance. So right now, for example, or I don't know, back in 2018, we had targets for 2030, right? Like we want by 2030 these things to happen, and we had very clear targets of what we wanted to achieve. And there's nothing better than seeing those targets exceeded, by the way, right? So we're trying to drive, for example, electrification of several states in the built environment, right? We've got to get rid of gas in buildings. And the key thing we said was by 2030, we want this to happen in all new buildings. And we've seen that be advanced by 5-6 years. And when we set that out in 2018, that seemed like an impossibility. Whereas now it's being adopted very clearly and industry is moving on, and that's just becoming the norm. And part of that is because of the work we did to normalize these things. So it's a question of how to create the leadership space for policy to occur, giving put the right incentives to government to make it easy for them to understand that this policy is achievable, and then giving people enough time to have the policy implemented. And I think that would probably be the way that we've learned to be successful at bringing this into view in a sometimes in a series of governments which were more hostile to the idea of doing something for climate change than say the current government. So we kind of have to work with everyone whoever's in government at the time.
Great. Thank you so much. Karthikeyan, would you like to go next?
The very important aspect in terms of the policy is we need to align with the national goals. Our net zero initiative is exactly aligned with the national mission on net zero as well. Having said that, there are multiple challenges we face in India with respect to the policy issues because of the structure. We have a central government as well as there are about 30 state governments, and the buildings and the power sector are the state subjects in India. So the challenges are multifold, but accordingly, our strategies have been worked out. Number one, yes, in terms of addressing the operational carbon, we focus more on the renewable sources. How the building and building sector can work on utilizing the renewables more in terms of both on-site renewable sources as well as utilizing the off-site renewable sources. There are challenges with respect to each of these areas. I don't want to get into the details, but we are working on in terms of addressing these challenges. The second aspect is in terms of addressing the embodied carbon. The embodied carbon, obviously, the materials play a significant role. So when we talk about utilizing the low carbon materials, the fundamental aspect is you need to implement the green procurement at the organization level. The green procurement, when a developer or a builder is working on a project, obviously he has to purchase the low carbon materials. That means there should be a green procurement policy in place. There should be a practice of purchasing green products and materials. So that is something we are pushing at the national level. So these strategies, we believe, will help us in terms of addressing the net zero carbon buildings requirement in a larger way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karthikeyan. Sam, would you also like to add something to this?
Yes, thank you very much, Mohammed. Yeah, I mean, I think I can't emphasize enough actually how important this question is. I mean, I would suggest this is probably the most important question of this session, in that I think that sometimes there's a perception that the green building councils can solve all of the problems, and that if everyone does our rating tools and does what we do, then we'll solve everything. But the reality is that maybe we affect 10% of the market here. And that leaves 90% doing not very much. So it's so important that we work with government and get them moving in the right direction, as Jorge said. We have this kind of conceptual model where we talk about a virtuous circle, where we start off with the voluntary rating tools that we run, that then affects the market. That allows us, as Jorge said, to go back to government and say, look, we've got this, the market leaders here doing the right thing, and so you should make everyone do it. The other sort of, I guess, key insight I would say is that, similar to what Jorge was saying around reluctant governments, I mean, we've had 10 years of, or more of 15 years of real inaction from governments here in New Zealand. But the successful strategy we've adopted is in getting the business leaders, I guess the leaders of some of the big property companies who believe in what we do and think that we can do it, and taking those to government and taking them to meet ministers and saying, look, that there's broad industry support for raising standards. We really suggest you should do that. So that's the strategy that we adopt.
That's nice. Natasha, would you like to contribute something to this?
Yes. Thank you all for all your valuable insight. I think the different aspects of the question was answered, which was very interesting. So while I was doing research on this topic, I found a research article by the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, which sort of has come up with 10 key measures on how to decarbonize the construction industry. And it's all of the topics that you all touched upon. The first one is to establish and implement an ambitious energy code, which I think what Jorge and Yvonne also spoke about. Also Karthikeyan, and we also have Econevas in India. Second one is to support the use of integrated design, that is using passive architecture and the incentive of having passive architecture strategies in buildings. Promote deep energy retrofit and renovation. I think the EU Commission and the UK GBC is sort of like leading in this front alone to do something about the existing building stock. The second is to lead by example by decarbonizing public buildings, which I thought was very interesting. I'm not very sure if this is a legislation that is done in different countries, but I thought it was a very interesting topic. The use of energy information and behavior change to drive energy efficiency, promote financing for energy efficiency. One of the examples that they have mentioned is Vidyut Raksha, that is by Tide India, and enable easy access to information on carbon footprint of materials. Of course, here technology providers like One Click LCA can also be helpful. Develop public procurement policies that incentivize materials with low carbon footprints, which is what Karthikeyan also spoke about. The example given here is Buy Clean California Act, which may be useful for someone who wants to do research on this topic. Integrate nature-based solutions. This is another topic that I have seen being mentioned only in this article and not many places. Biodiversity is becoming another hot topic, which green building councils are also stepping up to understand. Here they talk about SMAP, which is a primer for cooler cities, and develop integrated resilience strategies and plans for the built environment. Here they talk about the ACRA resilience strategy, which I thought was very interesting topics, and all of you sort of touched upon this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Okay, let's move toward next question for the discussion. So for the next question, I would like to ask you is, what are some of the strategies that green building councils are implementing to drive the uptake of EPDs or product-specific data from manufacturers to deliver low carbon designs? Tushant, would you like to start with this, answering that? Tushant, I think you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
Sorry.
No problem.
I believe there's a common consensus that as green building councils, we have an incredible responsibility and an opportunity to act as a conduit between the public sector and the private sector. And as Emirates GBC, we work very closely. I think we have an excessive, I think it's an excessive 6,000 members. And what we try to do is work very closely with the local manufacturers to support them on the journey of securing and having their products backed by EPDs. The second piece is advocacy as well. So, working very closely with local and international industry experts on outlining the need for EPDs. And I think the next phase of EPDs is now being discussed around material passports. So, I think advocacy is a big piece for Emirates GBC in driving the adaptation of environmental product declarations.
Thank you so much, Karthikeyan. Karthikeyan, would you like to go next?
Important point, Mohammed. So we need to dwell on this. I don't want to, create a confusion here. From IGBC point of view, we don't promote the EPDs. We had faced a lot of challenges from the market point of view in terms of understanding the EPD, first of all. Okay, so from the end user point of view, it is not user friendly at all. So what we have done is we have our own eco label Green Pro. We started working on in terms of bringing in the carbon footprint of the product as part of this eco label, so that the end user can easily identify, yes, this product makes sense from his building point of view. It contributes to making his building green. At the same time, he also gets to know about what exactly is the carbon footprint of the product, so that he can also choose the low carbon product within that category. So this is something we have been working on in IGBC for quite some time, and almost all our products, we started doing the life cycle analysis for them, and then helping them in terms of coming out with a very clear carbon footprint data, and then make it available publicly. At the same time, there are multiple challenges faced by the end users. From the LCA point of view, yes, there are difficulties in terms of awareness level. There are difficulty in terms of the capacity available in the industry point of view. There are difficulty in even accessing, the softwares. The one-click LCA, you people are expert in this area, but it should be available at the same time affordable. That is where the question comes. So I leave it to you. There are a lot of opportunity in India. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Sam, what's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. I guess a key thing for us is how we incentivize the use of EPDs in our tools. So we have been looking at life cycle analysis, or rewarding life cycle analysis of buildings, for quite a number of years now in New Zealand, probably for the last at least 5 years. In our latest iterations of both Green Star and Homestar, we now require an LCA of a building to be completed in order to get certification. So that's absolutely mandatory for any certification that comes through New Zealand Green Building Council. And of course, then as part of doing an LCA, you're then having to use EPD data in order to complete that LCA. And so what we've done is worked with a carbon footprinting provider and put together a very large database of local specific EPDs for use with our calculator tool that we've developed. And importantly, what we've then done is provided some generic data where if you don't have an EPD for the actual product you're using in your building, then you have to use a default value, which is very penalizing. It's going to be much higher than sort of typical values you might get from local suppliers. I think, as maybe has been pointed out by some other people, there's a little bit of a challenge with some industries in that, I'm just give an example here. We have 60 concrete suppliers in New Zealand. 2 of them are huge multinational companies and are very readily and very easily getting EPDs. It's how we deal with the remaining 58 that for whom, many of whom are very small players. And so I think there's a sort of an interesting discussion around how we make EPDs and carbon footprint data much more widespread and available for the smaller sectors.
Great, that was quite interesting. Yvonne, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. I will start by saying first that unlike most countries, the Green Building Rating Tool in Singapore, Green Mark, is not administered by the GBC but by the government. So since our founding days, the specific role that Singapore GBC plays in the Singapore industry is to complement the Green Mark scheme by addressing the supply chain and the development and delivery of a building. So some of the schemes that we have that complement the Green Mark scheme are our Singapore Green Building Product Certification Scheme, which, as the name implies, focuses on building products, materials, and building equipment and technologies. And we also have another one known as the Singapore Green Building Services Certification Scheme, which profiles professional consulting and contracting services firms that are able to deliver high-performance green buildings. So with these schemes, we are building up EPD awareness and capabilities in 2 main ways. Firstly, we are starting to introduce EPDs as part of the certification criteria for critical carbon-intensive construction materials. So this is being rolled out on a priority and industry readiness basis. And then secondly, we are also building up professional proficiencies and developing education and training in EPD development and life cycle assessment skills. And all this is to ensure that our professional services firms and practitioners have the right expertise to deliver low carbon buildings.
Thank you so much for answering, Yvonne. George, would you like to add your comments to this?
Very happy to. I think I want to add to what Sam has said in terms of, say, Green Star or the rating system, because we share the same. It shares the same DNA. So we've also been doing it for like a decade and so on, and we introduced requirements for doing assessments on upfront carbon emissions reductions, which requires or encourages EPDs. So I'll leave that to the side. I think what's interesting is what we're doing on the government side, which is we are creating a benchmark that will be used by government across buildings and in industry that essentially has default values for comparison, and then requires an analysis to be done with ideally materials that have environmental product declarations. We've been very successful at pushing the uptake of EPDs in Australia. Most of the big major material suppliers now have EPDs in the country, and that's pretty much because of the type of activities we've taken.
Great, thank you so much. Natasha, would you like to ask anything from our speakers regarding this?
Yes. I think each one of you have touched upon the EPD topic very differently. And most of you have also expressed what are some of the challenges that you're facing with the industry adoption of EPDs. What do you think, as a technology provider like One Click LCA, how can we enable you, or how can we aid you to sort of increase the if not EPDs, like increase transparency in product declarations itself? It's an open-ended question. I think anyone can answer. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you, Natasha.
Thank you. Excellent. Yes, we are all muted. We couldn't say anything back.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That makes perfect sense. It's a great question, Natasha. I actually am going to say, and I hope he doesn't run away to the hills for me because of me saying this. I'd love to call a friend, Sam, who happens to sit on the Australasian EPD program board. So, Sam, I think that's a great question for you, actually.
Oh, thank you very much for throwing me under the bus away. I mean,
It's a friendly suggestion. Just a
yeah,
thought, you know.
indeed, no. Look, I mean, I think clearly the important thing is in those databases, so that you're regularly update. You know, the technologies need to deliver the EPDs for us so that we can see them and transparently have them, keeping them up to date. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm just putting my EPD Australasia hat on. You know, I think some of us are struggling with some of the EPD providers are struggling with technology in terms of providing them in readable formats for the world to see. So I think if some of the technology providers who can maybe provide some assistance to some of the different EPD providers globally and helping them get the EPD data to be readable and you know those issues around multiple EPDs for similar products. That's one thing that we're struggling with. I mean, concrete especially. You know, I mean, we might have 1,000 different concrete mixes in the UK, in New Zealand. So you know, how do we deal with that as a problem? So you know, there's lots of technology problems I think that we need to solve with EPDs. Yeah.
And I think that speaks a little bit to the challenge, right? Which is like EPD Australasia or the other Australasian programs, like and ourselves, like as green building councils and rating system providers and so on. We're not swimming in money, right? We're not going around saying we have infinite money to do these things, and yet a lot of the world requires for these things to happen. So we do need to start looking at securing some of the relevant sources of funding, which will likely have to come from either government sources or well-funded sort of entities to set up these things in a way that everyone can pitch in and benefit and read from this stuff. We do have, as Sam said, the challenge of if I want to find an EPD, sometimes it's not easy to find the EPD. The EPD format is not correct. It's not machine readable. It's not actually segmented properly in the right name of the product that I may have on the brochure, or it might be all collected and not combined. So we had we've been working with EPD providers to try and get some data so we can put it into a database. And we asked them for an EPD, and they sent us an EPD that has something like 27 different products attached to it. We can't read that. Like you can't organize that. We need to work through that. And so that's where say having technology help and having people who have understanding and experience with databases and so on, and articulating and working with the EPD programs, everyone would benefit from it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering.
May I just a minute?
Yes.
I think from Indian Green Building Council point of view, we have different views. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know, the purpose of EPD was different when it was designed and then made as a standard and then practiced in Europe and US. But now we started using some information from EPD, not the entire information. Maybe the carbon footprint. No, why should we follow the EPD alone? Though this has been already very well done, can we make it simplified? You know, from the user point of view, because for me, an architect should be able to immediately get the number about the product. Okay, this is the carbon footprint of the product, so I should be able to compare with another product and use the low carbon product. I need not to break my head going through the entire EPD and then debate and then select it. Try to make it very simple from the end user point of view, and then simplify the process. That is what we would request. Obviously the technology provider can play a significant role here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering, Karthikeyan. All right, I think that was great. To wrap up the discussion, I am very excited to present the top 3 takeaways from our session. Natasha, can you please read this for our audience?
Thank you so much for such a lively discussion, and we will definitely take all the points that you have mentioned and try as a technology provider in helping you. The top 3 takeaways from this discussion is the risk of asset stranding is real. That is true because we are talking about many different aspects like building resilience, building for the future, all of these things. Harmonizing approaches to LCA globally. This is one of the challenges we also face as a technology provider, because different green building standards look at different aspects of the LCA. Pushing carbon budgeting and value engineering. This is also some of the topics that some of the points which different people iterated during our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. All right, moving on. Before we get started with our live Q&A, I would love to let you know more about Carbon Click LCA platform. If you have building projects requiring LCA or products requiring APDs, our business team of carbon experts would love to provide you a tailored demo to show you how our software might work in action for you. So if you would like to book a demo and get advice on decarbonizing, just click yes on the poll that you see now on your screen, and we would be happy to hear from you and get in touch with you. All right, finally, the moment we all have been waiting for, let's move towards our live Q&A session. And for the first question we have from our audience is, does the IGBC intend to impose operational and embodied carbon benchmark or constraints in order to attain net zero? Yes, Karthikeyan.
IGBC point of view, the embodied carbon making it zero is very difficult as of now. So what we have done is we have developed what is the threshold level you need to achieve when you are designing a building. Right now, based on various studies, we have kept it as about, say, 700 kg per meter square per year. That is a kind of, 700 kg per meter square. That is a benchmark we have kept it. From the operational carbon point of view, you can go towards zero. You can easily make it zero if you go 100% renewable. So this is the way the net zero carbon projects have been designed in India with IGBC.
Thank you so much.
For embodied, use it, make it better than the threshold. Operational carbon, make it zero.
Great. Thank you so much, Karthikeyan. Let's take the next question from our audience. And the next question we have is, what about the digital product passport? Will it be mandatory under EU regulations between 2026 and 2030? Would anyone like to answer that?
None of us are from Europe, are we? So.
I think as I was going to say, as someone who does no work in Europe, I don't think I'm confident answering that question.
I can say something about it, but not exactly. But I think the digital product passport is for mechanical and electrical products, if I'm not wrong. So it's like the EPDs for M&E equipment, right? I think so. So in Singapore, I mentioned earlier, we have the carbon calculator. So that was more for materials. We are launching, I think, literally tomorrow. What day is today? I think it's tomorrow. The M&E EPD, M&E carbon emissions calculator. Yeah, we have an event on tomorrow.
I think I'm happy to contribute to this one. At least based on the interaction with the private sector, digital product passports is definitely the direction of travel. That's the feedback that we're getting from consultants, contractors, and developers, pretty much the entire value chain. And I think it really addresses a real problem, because by 2050, 50% of the existing building stock will still be around. I think there's an urgent need than ever to understand how those assets would be repurposed. And one of the key enablers, as asset owners, developers go on the journey of repurposing the existing stock, is having product passports. And that's the challenge which is being posed to the private sector when it comes to retrofitting and repurposing existing assets. So I think it's a lesson learned from the past that for all new developments, you need to have digital passports that enable you to make sure the designs are flexible and it's not a constraint in any way when you want to repurpose developments.
Great. Thank you so much all for answering. So moving on for our last question for the day. And the last question we have is, does the green building scheme at-risk greenhouse gas emissions? Does it specify a CO2 limit or require carbon-neutral building materials? Yep. Anyone can answer that.
I can talk on the Green Star side in Australia, so I'm happy to do that.
Sure, George.
We have both operating and embodied emission targets essentially. The embodied emissions uses a reference building for now because we didn't have any good national benchmarks that we could rely on. That will change. And you will need to have at a building level, you need to achieve essentially the reduction. We don't have requirements for specific products, so we don't say concrete must be whatever 500 kilograms of CO2 per MPa or whatever it is. We don't say that. It's up to the building designer to get the best mix from the products they can use or they can get effectively. And in terms of carbon neutral products, for example, there are some rules that we have in our calculation methodology that can give you some benefit for some products where they are certified as carbon neutral, I should say, and it's a very narrow sort of certification of what that means. It's not the usual broad-based carbon neutral piece. It's a very narrow definition. That's how we manage that.
I'll just add to that. I mean, it's interesting to understand what was meant by the carbon neutral building materials in the question. I mean, one interpretation of that could be that the manufacturer is using carbon offsets in order to make it carbon neutral. I think Jorge's probably addressing that. I think maybe the question is worded around the carbon sequestration from biogenic materials, from natural materials like timber. So we have taken a very strict kind of interpretation of here, where we're only interested in the fossil emissions from products, not their carbon sequestration benefits, which has been quite controversial in our market. But we sort of passionately think that the focus should be on reducing fossil emissions, not negating those with carbon sequestration.
And I should say we do the same, right? So we made a call, and I think this was sort of like the Green Star side of things, we're probably the first ones to sort of be like, okay, now what if we just look at reductions, right? Like there's a lot of other things that we put on this bucket. Like I think, Sam, you have the biogenic carbon bonus, which sits like next to it, and we have like another credit called other carbon emissions, and it's the same principle, right? But it's like we were just saying, like for fossil emissions, what if we can just show actual reductions in emissions happening on the ground? And the reason being is that I think both of our schemes focus on the upfront section of the construction side, because that's what we can manage at the beginning.
Great. Thank you all for answering all the questions. It was really insightful. Moving on, I would like to know everyone about the One-Click LCA's free sustainability programs. They are part of our commitment to train 1 million low-carbon experts by 2030. You can access hundreds of hours of on-demand course materials at One-Click LCA Academy, or attend one of our live week-long bootcamps for comprehensive training on EPD and LCA concepts with our in-house experts. You can enroll for the next bootcamp by scanning the QR code on the screen, or you can visit academy.oneclicklca.com, for which you would find the link in the comments. Stay tuned for our next session with Arab on the importance of MEP in whole carbon life assessments, which will be starting in a few minutes after this. And finally, we are always happy to hear from you. If you would like to contact One-Click LCA, please visit oneclicklca.com. You're also welcome to follow us on LinkedIn and check out our YouTube channel, where you can find rich content about decarbonizing the industry. I would like to thank everyone who joins today's session, and so especially like to extend special thanks to our guest speakers, Yvonne, Sam, Tushant, George, and Karthikyan. It was a pleasure having all of you in this session.
Thank you very much.
You're happy to.
Yep. And I hope this session was really insightful for everyone. Have a lovely day. That's all for now. See you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.